it's tough enough when you have a state that has few resources, but then you have this oil and gas boom, and now we're sitting on all kinds of money. So spending is just going out of control, and they don't want to cut taxes because they don't think that is a good approach to economic development. They want to see government driving that economic development, which obviously not the way I think it should go.
Hello, welcome again to another episode in the Let People Prosper show. My name is Dr. Vance Ginn. I hope you're having a prosperous day. Well, today I'm delighted to bring on Paul Gessing, who is in New Mexico, and he's president of the Rio Grande Foundation, and he does a lot of great work overall in looking at economic freedom in New Mexico and other states and comparisons, also looking at film subsidies and corporate welfare. He just does a lot of good work overall, and has really been pushing the stage forward for liberty in a place that hasn't been a place of that's happened much for quite a while, being in New Mexico. And I'm sure he'll bring that up today. He's been in Washington, D.C. He's led lobbying efforts at National Taxpayers Union and a whole bunch of other issues. And I'm sure we'll talk about some of those things today. But Paul, it's a pleasure to have you on the Let People Prosper show.
Hey, good to be with you, Vance. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's good to have you on. And so let me go ahead and ask you the first question I do, all the guests to get us started here today. What motivates you to do what you do every day?
Well, liberty and wanting the human race, at least in New Mexico, but obviously I care about everybody. I care about New Mexico more because I want to see people thrive and do better. Yeah. And I've been at the Rio Grande Foundation for nearly 20 years now. Didn't grow up here, had family ties here, took the opportunity after spending some time in Washington, D.C., doing what I would call very similar work, but more at the federal level for the National Taxpayers Union. I took an opportunity, a very entrepreneurial one at that, to take over a state think tank, the Rio Grande Foundation, based here in New Mexico and dealing with public policy issues in the state. I didn't want to be a beltway bandit. I didn't want to hang out in Washington, D.C. and work in Congress for a lot of different reasons, some of which is just, traffic and cost of living. There's a lot to be said for the land of enchantment here in New Mexico. Public policy is not really one of those, but really it just, I've always been really interested in public policy and how it impacts human lives. And New Mexico, I kind of didn't know what I was getting into in a sense. I thought to myself, well, Gary Johnson was governor and Bill Richardson was cutting taxes. How bad could this state be? Well, as I quickly learned, it can be pretty bad. And it's actually gotten a little bit worse over the years. So never a bastion of economic freedom and opportunity. New Mexico faces a lot of challenges, and we can discuss those. But even though it's a frustrating thing, I enjoy the day-to-day of my job. I enjoy trying to work to educate average folks about how they can benefit, how their lives can be better with economic freedom.
Yeah, I love it. And when you were building kind of your economic freedom views and liberty-focused views, were there certain books or different lessons that maybe you learned over time that got to you to this worldview that you have today?
Economics in one lesson, iPencil, those were a few of the big books. One of the books that was really influential on more my broader perspective was Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand. I know that's cliche, but I was not always the fully formed kind of libertarian free marketeer that you see before you today. I kind of started my journey on the political left and even did an internship stint on Capitol Hill for then Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan.
Wow.
Definitely a man of a little bit more of the left. And, just evolved over time. I basically realized that government doesn't have the solutions to humanity's problems, and we need to let people be free within, of course, the context of, not inflicting fraud or physical force upon each other. And the only way to do that is through, I would describe myself as fairly libertarian, a constitutional libertarian, not a anarchist or anything by any stretch of the imagination, but, very much oriented towards letting individuals make decisions that make sense for them.
Yeah. Well, it's right in line with where I'm at, and where I think a lot of the listeners are as well. Whenever you were in DC and you made this decision to go somewhere else, in choosing New Mexico, you kind of brought up some key points there. But you probably had an option to go many different places. And one of the things in economics is people move with their feet, and incentives matter and everything else. And were there other things that really drew you to New Mexico compared to DC, wanting to be in the swamp? And I totally feel you on that. I was there for a year and I was like, I got to get out of here and get back to Texas. But I wonder kind of your thought process as you got a family and you're growing, they're growing up and everything, and your business and everything else. What do you enjoy about New Mexico? Before we start getting into some of the liberty and freedom issues that are there, I would guess that, Paul, to some extent, you do love it there to some extent, right?
I do. Yeah. I love the outdoors. I love the low humidity. I love the wide open spaces, the sunrises, the sunsets, the green chilies, the food, and unique culture. Skiing, I enjoy that. I know a lot of folks come over from Texas to do that here in New Mexico. I mean, really, it boiled down to me at the time, as I had family ties to New Mexico. And that was a big part of it. I had visited New Mexico many times. My mom actually grew up here. So there was a big part of that, that kind of gave me the desire, the willingness to come to New Mexico. I was familiar with the political situation and a bit of the economic situation before I came here, but obviously learned a great deal about that over the span of especially those first 4 or 5 years, just trying to figure out what was going on, why it was happening in New Mexico. So, I didn't run through a lot of the economic numbers or education numbers when I made the move. It was much more family ties. So, maybe a bit of an anomaly. I mean, I totally see and understand why New Mexico is attractive to some, but also why we're at the bottom of so many economic and education lists because of the frustrations people undoubtedly have when they try to do business here. Yeah.
No, it makes sense. And I mean, I guess in New Mexico, right, you've got some of the Permian Basin there. You got some oil revenues that are coming in. When I was going to school at Texas Tech up in Lubbock, that was where we had our pledge retreat. I was in a co-ed business fraternity called Alpha Kappa Psi, and we would go to Rio and have a great time, and drive through, we'd go through Albuquerque and just different places. And I mean, I really enjoyed a lot of my time in New Mexico. But I could see kind of your points as well about the lack of education improvements, the lack of economic freedom, and how that can drive people away. It's interesting because in the South in particular, I mean, you kind of think about it that way with Texas and New Mexico and Louisiana and others, you've had this in-migration from other states in places like Texas, Florida, a lot of the places, but you haven't seen the same thing when it comes to places like New Mexico and Louisiana in particular. And it's interesting to see why people are fleeing those states compared to those that are coming in. And do you think that has more to do with the economic freedom? Do you think it has to do more with familial things? I mean, I guess there's a lot of different areas that we could look at, and we could try to pinpoint and say, well, it's this, that, and another. But what are some of the big things that come to mind for you?
Well, there's no doubt that economic freedom is a big challenge faced in New Mexico. Historically speaking, and of course, New Mexico has a very long and unique history. The oldest state capital as a city is Santa Fe, and it's got a lot of history of being under Spanish rule, Mexican rule for a short time. So it shares some of that with Texas, of course. But I always tell people that New Mexico really became a modern U.S. state on December 7th, 1941, because obviously that was the date that Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. It set in motion the U.S. involvement in World War II, which of course led to the Manhattan Project. If you've seen the movie Oppenheimer or you read the history, that put New Mexico on the map, and we became a government bastion, the federal government in particular. From then on out, oil was then discovered in New Mexico. And of course, the oil economy, oil helped win World War II.
Yeah.
It became a critical part of, our economy after that. And New Mexico for years was always kind of a top 10 producer. And then you mentioned the Permian Basin. About a decade ago, there were some shale findings made in the Permian Basin on the New Mexico side, and we catapulted all the way to being the second biggest producer in the entire country. Texas being number one at the state level, we're number two. And that's created a flood of revenue that we haven't actually done much good with, unfortunately, due to the political philosophies that dominate our legislature and our governor, and quite frankly, the population. We could have done some incredible stuff with those dollars. And of course, I'd like to explain a little bit about that. But that's kind of the way New Mexico developed. I joke that we set ourselves up as an economic two-legged stool on federal government spending and oil and gas. But if you've ever gone to a bar or sat on a stool before, you know that a two-legged stool is not a very good stool.
Yeah.
It falls over quite easily. And unfortunately, New Mexico economically has never really developed that kind of that private sector, that robust, non-government, non-resource driven area of its economy. And that's driven almost 100% by public policy decisions made in our legislature and by our governors.
Yeah. Yeah. So it wasn't Breaking Bad then that brought it to life in New Mexico.
No, and I know the film industry and film subsidies are something we're going to talk about as well. And Breaking Bad is obviously the number one show. And of course, that's well known internationally. People still come to Albuquerque and do tours, see the house where the pizza was thrown on the roof and various things. And I, of course, watched it myself.
Sure.
But New Mexico was a movie bastion long before Breaking Bad and the film subsidies came about. In fact, a little movie named Red Dawn, which was a very kind of frightening film back in the 80s when the Cold War was still going on. That was filmed in northern New Mexico. Robert Redford, the Milagro Beanfield Wars, another pretty famous movie that came out before film subsidies. But of course, once the government of New Mexico started paying Hollywood to come to do business in New Mexico, up to 40 cents on the dollar now, by the way, we're giving out to these film subsidy country, these film companies that are coming here. It's crazy. So we've got a lot of films going on here, but we're paying a dear price to get them here.
Yeah. Wow. And I do want to get into that some more. But let's go into this report that you put out with Matt Mitchell, who's a good friend, and he's been on the show, I think, twice now. But he's over at the Fraser Institute. He does a lot of other great work. And y'all wrote this report. New Mexico is the only state in the U.S. to see a decrease in economic freedom over the past 4 decades. And there's a great chart here, and I'll make sure to put this in the show notes page. But from 1981 to 2022, percent change in economic freedom is a decline of 10% in New Mexico. And New Mexico is the only state in the union to lose economic freedom. And you got Michigan that's up, almost 90%. You have some other states move here and there. Texas is up about almost 15%. But New Mexico down 10%. The next best, or the next worst one, I guess you would say, is Arizona, which looks to be up maybe 2 or 3%. And so that's just fascinating to me to see that. I mean, I knew that it had problems, but when you look at economic freedom and the way that they do it, the Fraser Institute, and we talked about this before on the podcast, but is basically looking at government spending, taxes, and labor market regulations. And when you put those all in together in their index, it spits out an index, an amount of value, and then they compare those between the states to give their economic ranking. And so the values are the ones that are looking at here to show that it's down 10% over that period of time. And that's just wild. But what did you find out in this research that you're doing with Matt and other things that you've been working on? What were really big highlights for you, Paul?
Well, first and foremost, I'll toot my horn or his horn. Matt is another denizen of New Mexico.
Yeah.
He lives in a little town called Angel Fire, which is another beautiful, beautiful area in the land of enchantment. So, we had this connection. He actually had been involved in the Rio Grande Foundation 2 decades ago when I was looking to take over and to run it, moving out from Washington, D.C. That's when I met Matt initially. And, that whole thing, the idea that we're the only state to see a decline in economic freedom. And, it's all relative, but we're talking since 1981. I mean, I suppose you can look at Michigan and say, well, the UAW and that whole industry has lost a lot of its sway. And of course, the unions have lost a lot of sway. So they've increased their economic freedom. Whereas Arizona has long been a bastion of economic freedom, but it's kind of gone a little to the left, been more purplish. Because I saw that and I thought, well, gee, Arizona and New Mexico we were territorial, components at the same time for a long history there. But New Mexico, it's a little tricky. I don't understand why we declined. I think the biggest thing that we've seen, maybe not since 81, but in the 20 years since I've been here, which is since 2006, is that the Democratic Party has really held New Mexico politically since 1930. We're coming up on 100 years since the Republican Party had what we call a trifecta, the House, Senate, and the governorship. It has been a very, very long time. And of course, I'm not telling you that Republicans are the answer, that Democrats are always bad. But I will say that this has been a largely one-party state. You've had, like I said, Gary Johnson, Susana Martinez. You've had some level of Republican leadership, but it's really been a one-party state. And the Democrats now have moved way to the left. They are now hardcore progressives. They not only believe that government is the solution to all the problems, but they work on this stuff 24/7. The progressives they are political creatures. They're political animals, and they are very well funded. And that makes things difficult come election time, especially in a state without the kind of conservative infrastructure that you have in a lot of other states. I don't know if that's the big reason that we've fallen down. Yeah. Because I would say that, 1930 is not an accident. New Mexico really flipped, kind of under FDR, the New Deal. That era really put New Mexico on a new trajectory. And of course, then the Manhattan Project, coming in the 40s. So we've had this philosophical underpinning of government is the answer. But that just obviously hasn't worked. And I guess if you stand still or you ignore economic freedom as a policy, as a broad array of policies, you wind up just getting left behind. And that's to me, the kind of underpinning story of that paper is that none of our policymakers who lead this state currently really focus on economic freedom. We need to make this an issue. And we try like heck. Yeah. And we point out every single time all the various policy areas where we need to change direction in New Mexico. But it's just, it's tough enough when you have a state that has few resources, but then you have this oil and gas boom, and now we're sitting on all kinds of money. So spending is just going out of control, and they don't want to cut taxes because they don't think that is a good approach to economic development. They want to see government driving that economic development, which obviously not the way I think it should go. Yeah, definitely. And I want to get some of those details, but from the report, and there's some great infographics here for the audience to go check out. But I think when you look at 3 key variables that show how an economy grows, right? You have capital and you have labor and you have your productivity and those sort of things. But when you look at population growth from the decade 2013 to 2022 in the report, New Mexico is up only 1% over that period compared to other places in the Southwest. You have Oklahoma, 4%, Colorado, 11%, Texas, 14%, Utah, 16%, and the average of the Southwest states up 12%.
So if you have fewer people, there's less labor, the fewer people to work. And I think that's interesting too, because then you go to employment growth. Well, employment growth was only up 1% over that period as well, even as places like Texas, where I'm at, is up 21%. And the average of those Southwest states was 19%. And then that contributes to real GDP growth, right, over that decade. For New Mexico was up 13%, which actually Oklahoma, which was kind of surprising to me, was below that. It was up only 6%. But you have places like, Texas up 35%, Utah up 52%, and the average of that Southwest states, including New Mexico, was 31% increase compared to only the 13% there in New Mexico. And what brought me to this, Paul, is from an economic stance, that makes sense. But one thing that I talk a lot about is I want people to prosper, as you know, let people prosper. And I talk about this all the time, but it's not just prosperity from material things. And real GDP doesn't necessarily tell us everything we want to know about how people are living and how they're thriving and everything else. But from what I've gathered from your writings and reading into this is that it almost feels like some people in New Mexico just feel like they're stuck. You also looked in the report about poverty rates, much higher in New Mexico compared to others in the South. I mean, there's a lot of other factors that's going into this, and that probably brings. And by the way, I like the Breaking Bad show. I've watched it multiple times, the whole series. Sure. For some reason, it gets to me. But I think it brings people to these other things that are going on, kind of a third option, whether it's drugs or something else, because of the lack of that thriving that's happening. What do you think about that?
Well, the first thing I would say is that even those population figures kind of understate the challenge, because New Mexico, as we all know, or anybody who's been here, I mean, we call it the land of enchantment, and it's not wrong in the sense that we have low humidity, we have all these outdoor activities and unique cultures. So we see a lot of people coming, including Texans, retiring to New Mexico, which is great. We're happy to have them, but our population is aging. A exodus of the younger population that really accelerated during COVID because, and not to go down that whole rabbit hole, but COVID, we were one of the most restrictive states in the country under our current governor, Lujan Grisham, and a lot of young people were challenged with lack of sporting activities, lack of education in person, and real challenges. So a lot of families just said, all right, we're done with it. There's better opportunities in Texas and in other states anyway. So we're getting out of New Mexico. So our population is both relatively stagnant and it's aging quite quickly. And that is a double whammy. And we still tax Social Security. I mean, it just absolutely blows my mind. Now, so that means that the retirees who tend to come here are probably not likely to be the high income retirees. They're going to be in the lower levels because they don't have to pay that Social Security tax. So we should invest in steel toe boots in New Mexico because we just do nothing but shoot ourselves in the foot when it comes to public policy. And I mean, the Social Security tax is only one of dozens of ways that we mess up. I mean, it's not that we have a huge tax burden. It's that we tax things very inefficiently. Gross receipts tax being one of those examples. And we're sitting on, as a state, $61 billion. We have one of the largest sovereign wealth funds in the country, for sure, in the world even, because the politicians, the Democrats who control this state, don't want to give that money back to the people. So they stick it in various investment funds. Most of it goes out of state. They try to invest it for a rate of return. And they try to, essentially, their goal seems to be to make New Mexico government self-sustaining. So they're not even relying on we, the people, the taxpayers. They're just able to run the government off of investments made of oil and gas. That sounds good if you're a budget guy in the state of New Mexico, because your job is real easy. But boy, it doesn't do much for the average citizen of the state of New Mexico.
Wow. I didn't realize that. So $61 billion is in that fund now?
61 billion. It's split among a few different funds. Yeah, we call them the permanent funds, or the land grant permanent fund, the severance tax permanent fund, and there's a half dozen or more others. They keep setting them up every year. This last year, in all the boneheaded activities that we did in the legislature, they set up a $2 billion fund for Medicaid so that in the event that and we're the number one state percentage of our population on Medicaid. So in the event that Trump or the Congress slash Medicaid or even reduce it slightly, we've got a special fund just set up for keeping Medicaid afloat. When at one time, right at the cusp of COVID, we had about half of our entire population on Medicaid, which is just, it's horrible for so many reasons.
Yeah. Wow. Because in Texas right now, Paul, there's $28 billion is in the rainy day fund that comes from severance taxes. So basically there's twice as much in this rainy day or severance taxes in New Mexico as there is in Texas. Twice as much. That's crazy.
We have a 2 million person population thereabouts, while you guys have 35 million over there in Texas. And it keeps growing and growing. And like you said, we're stagnant. So this state is truly, it has all the potential in the world. Like truly, we are the total package. The only thing we don't have is a lot of water. We're not like, on a port or on an ocean or anything. So that's one challenge. It makes big time agriculture very difficult.
Yeah.
And we have to be focused on conserving water. But everything else, New Mexico has it, and we're just not doing it because, again, we elect people who are not interested in economic freedom and the things we talk about.
Yeah. Well, economic freedom is so important. And it really is. And, when I was looking at some of the other factors there in New Mexico, I guess the top individual income tax rate, 5.9%, right?
That's right.
It's interesting because we talked to like Grover at ATR and others, they're championing kind of this push where so many states are moving to zero on their income taxes or getting to a flat tax rate. And so that's also going to hold back New Mexico from being as competitive because so many states are moving in a better direction. You kind of see that as well?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And just a quick note, Bill Richardson, of course, he was a Democrat. He's now deceased, but he was there in the governor's mansion when I came to New Mexico. In 2003, and during that era, really the early 2000s, and you compare him with governors like George Bush of Texas or Mike Huckabee and others, a lot of names that kind of throwbacks. Bill Richardson was the most aggressive tax-cutting governor in the country at the time. He did some other things I didn't care for, but he took our top income tax rate from 8.2 to 4.9. Then subsequently, for no good reason whatsoever, the Democrats in the legislature and the governor decided to raise that back up to 5.9 on higher earners. But Bill Richardson was a genuine tax-cutting Democrat, and that's just a different era now looking back because the Democrats in New Mexico have moved way, way to the left. And Michelle Lujan Grisham, our current governor, is very far to the left. We have another governor's race because she's termed out in 2026. And kind of my worst nightmare, and I think the worst nightmare for this state, is Deb Haaland, who was Interior Secretary under Joe Biden. She is the darling of the progressives, very well funded, and she is a very, very real threat to be the state's next governor. And boy, that would be a real mess because the Democrats have always kind of had this truce with the oil and gas industry where they don't really come after it and attack it full bore. They put some regulations here, a new tax here, but they don't really go after oil and gas because that's what funds more than half of our state budget on an annual basis. It really funds even more because some of the money is diverted into these permanent funds. You never really see it. It's a very arcane, very lacking in transparency budget process. But I think Deb Haaland, who certainly came after oil and gas in her role as Interior Secretary, she would be ready to threaten the oil and gas industry directly. So that's something that scares me down the road. Obviously, we're working every day just to try to educate people and make sure that they're aware of what could be done, how we could prosper right now with this money, with this industry, and then the fears of what could happen. It's certainly there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, unfortunately, right, is some of this money is going, as we talked a little bit about earlier, is film subsidies and just
Yes.
nonsense that's happening out there. And you and I are talking here recently about what was happening in Texas, where they passed this bill, Senate Bill 22, that gives $300 million for films in Texas to be produced and all these things. We even had Matthew McConaughey and Woody Harrelson come down and testify before the House committee and the Senate committee. And then you had the Lieutenant Governor, Dan Patrick, sitting right behind them, supporting all this nonsense. And it passed. The governor signed it, and it's going to be about over a decade. It's going to be about $1.5 billion from taxpayers on top of this. And I think you and I would agree this isn't a role for government, but there was such a big push, especially by the politicians, to win votes on this. And I wonder what the experience has been in New Mexico, though, and what some of your research has shown over time.
Well, you'll be surprised to find out that the modern New Mexico film subsidy program actually got its start, a much more modest start, way back during the Gary Johnson administration.
Oh,
I know.
Oh.
And there was, when Gary was running for president, I forget if he'd switched to Libertarian or was still running as a Republican, but he and Justin Amash, the erstwhile congressman from Michigan, got into a public Twitter dispute, and Justin Amash criticized Johnson for subsidizing Hollywood. And Justin Amash was 100% correct.
Yeah.
Gary was 100% wrong. Now, kind of taking this shortly through over time, certainly Richardson, one of the things I disagreed with him, he took a relatively small program and ramped it up so that New Mexico gave 25 cents on the dollar to reimburse Hollywood for their expenses. So any industry that you give 25% of their cost paid for by the taxpayer is going to come to that state. And so that was the first real big foray into film. Then Susana Martinez came along, a Republican, and times were tough. We're talking, financial crisis of 2008, that era. And she had to impose some budgetary realism, but the legislature was still Democrat, so she couldn't get what she wanted. So she imposed a $50 million annual film subsidy spending cap. So that's the most that was spent for those years after she got that in place. Well, what happened is that the film companies kept filming, and they would build up a IOU from the state of New Mexico, so that when the current governor, Michelle Lujan Grisham, took over, the oil and gas industry, the boom was really starting to happen. So the state was flush with cash. So she literally just wrote checks to clear the books on all those receipts that they were asking for reimbursements on, above and beyond the $50 million annual figure.
Wow.
And then she also increased the level of subsidy from 25% up to a potential of 40%. So now we're reimbursing for 40% of the expenses. The data are clear. And I'm not talking just about Rio Grande Foundation. I'm talking about various university researchers and others who have studied this. The Hollywood subsidies are a money loser. And first and foremost, we can argue about, say Texas, just hypothetically, threw $300 million at some, Honda or some Japanese automaker that's going to build a factory in Amarillo, place I'm familiar with very much so. At least, though, at the end of the day, you have a factory there that they are likely to come back to and keep, generating automobiles and jobs, et cetera. Hollywood can pick up and move wherever the subsidies are most elaborate and wherever they're best. So you have no assurance past any given production that they're going to stick around. It's a mobile industry. So you're not even generating any public investment. We do have a few film studios around. Interestingly enough, we got involved. This is a decade ago. Somebody had built a privately financed film studio, and then we were getting subsidized by the government film studio. So they were double dipping and getting economic development dollars to build studios than to suck in more economic development funds through the film. It's just, oh my gosh.
Wow.
My blood pressure's skyrocketing, but you can see why this is such a dangerous track to go down. Yeah, they should be cutting property taxes, doing something for the people of Texas, not special giveaways to an industry. And quite frankly, we've even seen this discussion in Washington where Trump was talking about 100% tariffs. Now, I think that was crazy and foolish, but there's been a lot of market forces. I look at the film industry simply because New Mexico is so deeply involved in this. Everybody ramped up their streaming big time during COVID because everybody was at home on their couches watching lots of streaming programs. And then now everybody's back to normal, and Hollywood's in a big recession. And they're going to film wherever they can find not just the subsidies, but in the case of some of these overseas deals, they're getting cheaper labor rates as well. So Hollywood, they may come across as a bunch of libby-dibby, commie, lefty wing jobs, but when it comes to their bottom lines, they are 100% capitalistic, and they will take whatever best deal is out there.
Yeah, no, that's well put there. And what's wild about it too is in Texas, and I'm sure, I don't know, you might have heard some of this in New Mexico as well, but in Texas, the push is that we need movies to represent Texas, and we need movies and we need to support these from the government because we need more Christian movies. You know what I mean? Like there was a push to that part of the audience of more conservatives for them to want to support this because it was something that they were going to watch later. Now we'll see if that ever happens or not. But it's just the bad thing about corporate welfare is the picking winners and losers and distorting the marketplace from what it otherwise would be, whether it's the energy sector, whether it's transportation or whatever. But now when it's coming to film subsidies, I just don't find any role for government. Why would we want government to be involved in this in any capacity whenever it's going to cost us more in the process and it's going to not work? To your point, which is a great one, is that there really isn't long-term investment. Maybe you get you get an increase here in one area or one town because they're going to go out to eat more often and they're going to buy more supplies. But then when they go away, that's all gone. And so that changes up a lot of the dynamics.
Yeah. And just another thing on the film subsidies. And, you and I, we talk all the time about these economic figures and data points. It is one thing, and we can certainly argue about whether it's beneficial or not, to give certain industries or certain businesses, say, an exemption from a certain tax, a gross receipts tax or sales tax or property tax. Those are all done in various states. But it's another thing for the government to have to go out and collect taxes on everybody else, private sector, individuals, businesses, whatever. And then they come out and spend that money. They're cutting checks to one specific industry because they are politically favored. That is obviously a much more aggressive, much more dramatic subsidy. And when you're paying, as New Mexico does, up to 40% of the cost of filming, that's just mind-numbing. Now, I got to take a point. Obviously, we talked about Breaking Bad a few times. And, there's a lot of people, especially in my sphere, who are not thrilled with Breaking Bad because if you haven't seen the show, it's about meth dealing and drugs and kind of a very seedy side of society. In New Mexico and Albuquerque, certainly have more than our fair share of that. But when I think of Texas and I think of movies and shows, I mean, obviously, I was a kid. I remember Dallas, the TV show. That was a huge thing. Everybody got, a real big fever for Dallas and Texas. But it's Landman now, baby. Landman is a great show. Yeah. And I don't know if they were getting subsidies. It's obviously been filmed before there was this big push. That was a great illustration. You could have done the same exact thing, filming all that in New Mexico. I don't know why they went to Texas, assuming they did. It certainly looks like it. But that is a show with at least the messaging much more positive to the world that I like. I like to see what they're doing on that show, Taylor Sheridan and whatnot. It's a great show if you haven't gotten a chance to watch it.
Yeah, no, great point there. Great point. And as we're wrapping up here now, Paul, what do you see like with your research there in New Mexico and looking at other states and other things? What do you propose to them there in New Mexico, or maybe for other states as well to look into? But how could they turn things around? What are you really proposing to help improve economic freedom and allow for more economic opportunity there in New Mexico?
Well, I use two stages to talk about this because for a long time, New Mexico was relatively constrained by slow growing budgets and just the lack of money to do things like tax reform and whatnot. So it was much more focused on like right to work. We're not a right to work state. Other regulatory issues that we face and challenges to overcome. We still obviously focus on those, talk about them, highlight them. But right now we're just in the midst of this oil and gas boom. And yet maybe slowing down because prices are down. But we have this war chest of money that we could be sharing with the people of New Mexico and really not breaking a sweat. Now that's truly unique. Most states, they have to phase things in. They have to be careful about dramatic tax changes, and they have to make sure all the stars align and they don't go into a recession all of a sudden, whatnot. New Mexico could easily have its cake and eat it too. We could eliminate the personal income tax and have the bloated, inefficient government that we have. At least we would have no personal income tax, and that would be fantastic. But for other states, I mean, I really do talk to folks a lot about the film subsidy issue because that seems to be one. I mean, you have to understand, I mean, these people share an image. They sell image and glitz and glamour. That's what they do. So these policymakers, these politicians, they call Washington, D.C. Hollywood for nerds. Well, these nerds, they want to be a part of the glitz and the glamour. And when Bill Richardson was out, doing his thing with the film subsidies, the one who really got this ball rolling, Jessica Simpson came to town, was the big star. And, I get it. These politicians love that stuff. It makes them look like a star. And, it doesn't hurt. It's Jessica Simpson. She was at the top of her game back in the early 2000s. And so, it's just it's a thing that states need to stay away from. And if you want to talk about reducing taxes, ideally do that across the board. Don't spend money to bring any business to your state. You cannot and should not take money from the rest of the people of your state, business and individual alike, and hand checks over to other companies to come here. You got to make yourself attractive. And New Mexico's done a horrible job of that, despite our best efforts. We're trying every day. If ever the Wall Street Journal does a big splashy story on New Mexico, you'll know that we've finally broken through and things are going to change. And if they do start to change, it'll happen in a hurry because this state, like I said, we're like a volcano just waiting to erupt. We're just one good group of political leadership away from being the spot to be, because we've got the beautiful weather. We've got the incredibly unique history. We've got the beautiful mountains. We've got the skiing areas. You got a lot of cool things in this state. And I encourage your colleagues there, to the extent, especially there in Texas, to come out. You mentioned Ruidoso. Yeah. Beautiful area. I mean, it's not just Ruidoso in the mountains. It's Billy the Kid country. You got all that crazy history with Billy the Kid out there. And then Smokey the Bears from that same area, the original real life bear Smokey was in a forest fire and back in, I don't know, the 50s and became the Smokey the Bear. So New Mexico's got a lot of neat things about it, but we're just horribly run and managed.
Man, well, I hope you get it turned around, Paul. I know at Rio Grande Foundation, you are doing great work and have been for a long time of keeping to push this forward on free markets and lower taxes, less spending, all that good stuff. So maybe one day you'll have the opportunity where somebody will come in and they'll want to listen and then you can head them in the right direction.
Well, if you're New Mexico curious and you want to find out more, obviously this show is a great introduction, but we talk about New Mexico public policy issues. You've been on our show once, Tipping Point, New Mexico. We've done a large number of episodes on that, over 700 episodes. And we talk about, we talk to a lot of interesting people like yourself and others from around the country, around New Mexico. And then we talk about what issues are going on in the state. And we never are limited in terms of what we want to talk about, even though it's just a relatively small 2 million person state. There's always something going on, a lot of political corruption, a lot of shenanigans just in this land of enchantment that I inhabit. So love to see you in New Mexico at some point, and other folks who listen to this show, and maybe you can move here and vote better, and we can move this state together forward together.
There you go. There you go. Well, thanks for being on the Let People Prosper show, and God bless you and your family, Paul.
Thanks, Vance. Take care.
Thank you. And for the audience, thank you for joining us today. Hopefully you got a little insight on what's happening in New Mexico and what can be done to improve. And go check out New Mexico whenever you can as well. Make sure to put the Tipping Point podcast that Paul has, along with information about the Rio Grande Foundation, on my website at vanceginn.com, along with my Substack newsletter at vanceginn.substack.com. Be sure to subscribe to that as well. And until next time, God bless you and let people prosper.